All right, so we have a short section today on ecological succession, which is going to be B11B. So ecological succession is sequential appearance and disappearance of a species in a community over time. So this is just saying that over time, sometimes environments are completely destroyed of their life forms that are living in the area, or a new landmass will appear that doesn't have any life forms on it. And so ecological succession is talking about when there is a, re-inhabitation of the area over a certain period of time. And this is an example shown right here where a forest has burned down. You can tell it's burnt because the tree trunks have like charcoal marks and burn marks on them, and then the grass is kind of gone. And then over time, over a couple of years, this is the exact same forest where you see that grass is starting to regrow slowly, and then the greenery is returning. So there are two types of primary succession. Sorry, there's primary and secondary. So in primary succession, it's changing the ecosystem from scratch. So originally there is nothing living there. And it's kind of like when you're baking cake using the starting ingredients of like eggs, vanilla, sugar, flour, baking powder, milk, butter, and all those things are basic ingredients you're starting from scratch. On the other hand, secondary succession is changing an ecosystem from an existing ecosystem. Basically, you're starting out with some foundation laid out for you. So you're starting not from the basics, but you're gonna start with soil already there. So it's easier to begin and quicker to begin your ecosystem re-inhabitation. So it's like making a cake out of cake mix. Everything's already prepared for you. All you have to do is do the last couple of steps. So you're gonna get to that final result or that climax community much quicker. Just a quick summary. Which do you think occurs faster, primary succession or secondary succession? Choose your answer. Now, in specific detail, we're going to talk about primary succession. So primary succession steps start in a place with no soil. I don't know why these ones came in first. But first of all, when you have no soil, you have to have lichen grow as the first step. And lichen is this symbiotic relationship between algae and fungus. And they grow here on the rock because they don't actually need soil. They'll actually break down the rock to create soil as they themselves break the rock into smaller pieces, and then also as they themselves die and decompose. The second step is that mosses and ferns will grow after the lichen. And mosses look like this, and ferns are little leafy plants. That are not exactly as they don't require as much as like grasses and trees do. So these things can grow when there's a little bit of dirt and the dirt isn't very nutritious, but as they die, they fall and decompose and become part of the dirt, and they add more nutrition to the soil that is now forming as a thicker layer. The third step is that shrubs and trees can survive. So shorter trees and bushes are going to be able to survive on the soil that is produced from originally lichen, and then also mosses and ferns growing and dying and providing nutrients. The last step is that insects, small birds, and mammals can now move into the area because they have a habitat where they have shelter and they have food sources that they can, live off of. So then you'll actually get the active life forms moving in. A pioneer species is something that is called and named such because pioneers are the first ones to explore or go and be in an area. So they're like pioneers that would come to farm new lands for the first time. So mosses and lichens are the only things that are able to live without any soil on the ground, really. So they're considered pioneer species because they're the first ones that appear in an area when it's going to be repopulated, whether it's from, this one in the case is primary succession because there's no soil initially. So here is a diagram of what it looks like going from left all the way over to right. And so when you start out with bare rock, lichen are going to be the first ones that appear. And as you can notice, these are the pioneer stages where only pioneer species are showing up. And we have lichen showing up, breaking down a little bit to create a thin layer of soil. And then small annual plants and lichens are still going to be around. And as they're dying and decomposing and breaking down the rocks, they're going to create a thin layer of soil. And then you can start to have shorter plants grow in, like herbs and grasses, as the dirt is getting thicker and thicker and more nutritious. And then longer grasses, taller plants like shrubs and trees that don't like shade, they're going to be growing as the soil layer gets thicker and more nutritious in the intermediate stages. And at the very end, we have a climax community where you have trees that are shade tolerant, aka they can tolerate shade. They can tolerate plants that are taller and blocking some of the sunlight, where as long as they can get some sunlight, they're good, because there's different layers to the forest now. Since there's a lot more soil, a lot more nutrition, the roots can reach deeper and get water as well. And this occurs across hundreds of years. It's not a fast process. So if you took a picture of a forest after a fire, actually for this one in case, it's after like a new island forms from lava in the ocean, and you took a picture of it, if you took a picture of it every 10 years, for about 100 to 200 years, you might see this gradual increase in the amount of soil and the gradual increase in biodiversity as the plants start to grow in and become more and more complex communities. And then at the very end in the climax community, you'll have the animals returning to be able to live here. So this is quite interesting to observe, but it does take a long time. So you're going to answer this question. Ecological succession ends when A, biodiversity is lowest, B, lichens and mosses dominate, aka they're the most common, C, animals begin to use plant resources, or D, a climax community has been reached. So go ahead and pick up your answer and click on that one in the pear deck. Here's the correct answer. The answer is D. A climax community has been reached is the end of ecological succession. It doesn't mean that it's never going to happen again, because as long as fires are happening or new islands are growing, ecological succession will happen wherever those events are occurring. But in this space right now, ecological succession has ended because the climax community has been reached, and it's at a stable point that it'll remain at consistently until another big change causes something to happen. The other type of succession is secondary succession. And this starts in a place where there is soil. That's simple. Everything else is similar, and it pretty much follows exactly the same steps as primary succession, except for the fact that you're starting at an easier point of kickoff. And that's because the soil is already present. So you don't have to wait the really long time for lichen to break down the rocks and for moss to kind of bring nitrates into the soil as they break down. And you're starting at a point where the soil is already there. So you can already have plants coming in slowly, but it's going to be a lot faster than primary succession. Like I said, you don't need to wait through these stages. You're actually going to skip ahead through these really slow stages and jump straight into the stage where dirt and soil is already starting to be present, or is present, or has been present. And so you're going to have these short plants start to come in, taller plants, and then at the end you'll reach that climax community after a much shorter period of time, because you're skipping the initial steps of waiting for rocks to become soil. Okay, so instead of maybe 100 or 200 years, this might only take between like 150 to like 50 years, depending on where it is and what kind of natural disaster happened to bring you to this point in this community. So if there's already soil, I don't know if this question makes any sense. If there's already soil, what is not a pioneer species in a secondary succession? Okay, so in secondary succession, which one of these would not be the pioneer species that occurs? Right? Which one of these is the pioneer species that only occurs when the succession type is primary? So answer that for me. Sorry, this question doesn't make any sense. I'll fix it for the actual slide set. So the answer is lichens, because lichens are only present in primary succession. In secondary succession, they're not going to be considered the pioneer species, because we don't need anybody to break down rock to turn into soil, since the soil is already there. This is the case for examples like when there's a wildfire, right? It burns down most of the plants and foliage, but the dirt still remains. So it's secondary succession, and it's much quicker than primary succession when they're like a new island forming in the ocean, because you're going to be able to grow things that are in the soil already, and anything that travels over has soil to plant into and grow immediately, instead of waiting those years for the soil to develop. So this is an example of what the cycle looks like if you keep having an area go through succession. So you have an established climax community, which is like a forest that has finished succession, but then a disturbance will destroy the community, and then biota removed, but the soil remains, and the living things will either slowly already be dead and decomposed and be gotten rid of, or they'll become part of the soil, or they'll be removed, for example, by humans to, speed up the process of ecological succession. And then fast-growing plants initially dominate, and eventually the climax community is re-established, and then you'll cycle back again to here where it'll stay like this until maybe another disturbance might destroy the community. So drag the red circle to show where primary succession occurs. Drag the blue circle to show which one is a secondary succession occurring. Ask yourself as a tip to help you, is soil present? So as a summary for our two types of succession, primary succession starts in a place with no soil, so it's going to be rocks. And lichen is going to be the pioneer species that takes the rocks and turns it into soil for the community. Secondary succession is what starts with soil, so it happens a lot faster. So let's try some STAAR questions. You're going to use the rake method. We're going to use the rake method and show work. So the question here says, Enchanted Rock State Natural Area is located in Central Texas. Enchanted Rock is a dome of granite, so this area contains 4 easily identifiable communities. The table describes characteristics of each type of community in the area. So here's the table that's explaining everything that you can find. A student studying primary succession should focus on which of these communities? A, open oak woodland, B, mesquite grassland, C, floodplain, or D, granite rock. Now we're going to read and we're going to highlight. So I've highlighted the important parts here. It says dome of granite is definitely a good hint to what we might be thinking about. This table is really important because it tells us for each type of community, what are the characteristics that you can find in it. So we're going to be looking at these descriptions to help us answer. And the main part of the question is that we're going to be focusing on a primary succession example. So we want to rephrase the question just to make sure that we have everything clear on what we have to answer. And that's going to be, the step for asking what. And the question can be rephrased as, which one of the communities in the table is an example of primary succession? Now we're going to go to the knowledge section and pull from our knowledge from this review. And we know that primary succession starts from bare rock. Straightforward, simple. Now we're going to eliminate answers and we're going to pick the best answer. So we're going to be looking at these choices. Now these 4 choices just match with these 4 choices. So we'll just look at them from up here. And we know that primary succession starts from bare rock, and we're looking for a primary succession example. So open oak woodland says it's got several species of oak trees, cacti, plants, and some scattered grasses among scattered boulders. Well, there's rocks, but there's also a lot of plants, which indicates that there's probably already a soil there. Mesquite grassland has mesquite trees, abundant grasses, and areas with thick soil and few boulders. It's not bare rock. Floodplain says a thick mix of trees, shrubs, grasses, and numerous wildflowers, floods with heavy rains. All of these indicate that there's soil there because these plants all require soil to grow. Only granite rock here has barren rock with lichen patches, which is literally the example of initial stages of primary succession. So we'd be able to eliminate all those other choices and choose D as our correct answer. Now you're going to go through your independent practice and use the same method to show your work. We're going to be answering these questions, and there's only 2 of them, so you're going to work through them and then make sure that you finish this so I can get you a grade on these.